YSK If you want bread but are out of baker's yeast, you can cultivate wild yeasts from raisins. Or just flour and water and thyme. Well, yes and no. Assuming your jar and water are clean, the flour you get from the mill, from Gold Medal to Bob's Stone Mill and Damp, will have been milled to varying depths to hull the wheat before grinding. There was something beneficial about the type of yeasts that grow on grapes as well that made them suitable to this purpose. Might be making that part up. The doctor of each method is, anyway, you've got a better shot of starting a useful yeast colony with grapes, a little sugar, warm water, and a clean jar than you do from straight milled flour and water. YMMV Natch. So raisins help the bread with raising. You should write for The Simpsons. YSK If you want wild yeast because you want bread but are out of raisins, you can dry out grapes. YSK If you want wild yeast because you want bread but are out of raisins, you can dry out grapes you grew because you remembered to plant them in the vineyard you bought with the money you saved by not using store-bought yeast. #Circle of Life. This is called a starter, and raisins are a common way of starting a starter, but it takes quite a bit of time, and making bread from it is different than using commercial yeast. Doughs made with natural starters tend to be picky and take practice. It is an addicting art to getting the perfect sourdough. This is a totally valid method and a fun one, but the title makes it sound like swapping out butter for margarine, when using a starter is a different technique, not just a quick substitution. Regardless, happy quarantine baking to you all. Smile. Source: former professional baker. Anybody tried this with blueberries, goji berries, etc.? Is there a perceptible difference in the result? All fruits have some wild yeast on them. I made a hard cider with just the wild yeast off the apples. The wild yeast imparted some strange flavors, but it was consumable and nobody got sick. I've got plenty of yeast, but no bread flour. Bob's Red Mill and King Arthur both ship directly. Or just keep a pound of SAF instant yeast in your freezer and you will have enough yeast to last you quite a long time. A jar in the freezer is my go-to method when times are normal. Times not being normal, I thought a little old-school folk wisdom might come in handy. Anyone you know who's ever been in the can probably knows this method perfectly well from making pruno, except in the above recipe there's no dirty gym sake involved. I don't have a lot to say about my ex-wife, but this is one of the most interesting and useful tidbits of information she ever gave me. I've tried this method and it works perfectly. A slightly sourdough-y flavor but lovely fluffy chewy bread was the result. Also, I'd suggest doing sourdough if you're that desperate for yeast. Well, the whole premise behind the post is that should one find oneself having everything they need for bread but yeast, it is possible to culture some at home using basic ingredients like raisins, sugar, warm water, and a clean jar. Not everyone plans ahead, like not everyone knows there's ways to get back up to speed if you happen not to plan ahead by nabbing some sourdough starter from a friend or keeping a jar of yeast in the freezer. I'm a novice and just started my starter with pineapple juice and wall flour. Been at it for 4 days and seems to be going well. Adding 3 tbs of flour to 2 tbs filtered water daily. Can I add more than that or stick to what I've been doing? How much do I use to make a loaf of bread? Is there a yeast/cups of flour ratio when baking? Lots of fun. It's like playing with my new garden.